Hello and good morning. You've been welcomed many ways, and I'm just going to sit for a second and pretend we're all together just having this conversation. And as Paul talked about, today is just a magnification of what we have been doing the last few days, and that is setting a stage for not just having a series of experts who you come to listen to, but to recognize that everyone in this room has voice, has agency, has something to give, and our collective ability to hear and to believe makes this an important place to start. Not just an important place to gather, but to start the conversations. And today, we'll do something a little bit different than we've done the other days, and that is getting you into smaller conversations so that can happen. As I listened to the panels over the last few days, everyone had an opportunity to at least share a story, and like many of you, I was taking notes of things that I wanted to remember that people had said. And one thing that came through for me was this whole power of the narrative, is creating the memory landscape, as someone put it, drawing the lessons from experience. And so I have a South Africa story, one that was told to me, because in this whole sense of collective leadership, one of the things that I've learned is that you can appreciate someone, you can grow from that experience, but it is not your experience. And so I respect that authenticity, but I want to share with you a lesson. Probably one of my first trips to South Africa was in the middle 90s, just after Nelson Mandela had been released from prison. And I was here with some NGO colleagues, and one of the things we did was to spend some time in Cape Town. We went out to Robben's Island. Before there were lollipops and brochures and all of the things that come with something becoming a destination for people from around the world. There was no big ferries and buses and people going out. We just went out on a little boat to the island. And I spent the better part of the day with a former inmate, because some of the first guides for Robben's Island were in fact the inmates. And the power of narrative, because they told their stories, was such a way of sharing and putting you in that experience, just like we had yesterday when we had an opportunity to feel what it was like to be in Soweto. And the gentleman I was with sat down and he started telling me stories, because he had been incarcerated with Nelson Mandela. And I'm going to share just two stories and talk about things that we ought to remember for today as we work together. And the first one has to do with the value of unlikely allies. When we talk about collaborative leadership and how that fits together, we don't always have to be at points where we agree on everything. You know, Paul talked about that crossroads and the nexus that Peter Block talks about. It is finding that spot to be able to talk about. And he shared with me the fact that one of the things that they did to keep active, and you know, we have heard just how hard it is when you are being oppressed, even when you're being detained, and what they did for each other. And so whoever had the most education at that time taught others. And so by the time many of the prisoners got out, they actually had qualified for advanced education, and that teaching of each other. Well, most of it was done and was organized by Mandela for the black prisoners who were there for political purposes. But during the process, he shared with me, the guards wanted to advance in their careers as well. And so they asked, or perhaps demanded, that they be taught as well. But what happened in that teaching was a relationship where they were able to trade some of that for some things that they needed to make the stay there a little less arduous. You know, and you would never have thought that that could have occurred on those walls. So that whole idea of unlikely allies is really something that has stuck with me. And it reminds me that there is always a place for common ground and always some mutuality. And even while it's not always the same, it can be useful when we have a common goal. The second was I was young and I was angry. I was very much an activist. And I was like, how can you be so patient? And I had just come back from some of the Truth and Reconciliation hearings, and forgiving. I just couldn't understand the concept. And I was asking the questions because where was the urgency of now and where was the indignancy? And now here is your chance to get even. And he took me down where there was some water and a huge pile of rocks and explained to me that every day their job all day was to move rocks from one place to the other. There's no purpose in that, to move rocks from one place to the other. But it's another way of really breaking down one's humanity and dignity. And he took a rock and he put it in my hand. And then he made me come over toward the water and put my hand in the water and let it run through my hand. And he said, my sister, you have got to understand, look at this rock. And the rock was misshapen. It was curved on the end. And he said, the water has changed the rock. And he said, you pick the water, it doesn't look like much, it flows through your hands. He said, but the water continues to flow. And water flowing on a rock over time changes the rock forever. And he said, this concept is not one of giving up. People talked about the many forms of resistance that people do. But for him and for me, because it changed my life, he said, this is revolutionary patience. And I had never thought about that concept before. And as we think about the work that we're going to do and continue to do, I thought yesterday about the fact that they were talking about the students protesting in Soweto and for things like water and electricity. And I thought, wait a minute. When I was first here in the 90s, this is what we were protesting. They were protesting for in Soweto. But that rock, that water has to continue to change. And that's where the hope comes. And that's where the partnership comes that the foundation feels is so important in terms of this work. It reminds me of a couple of things that I want you to think about today as we do this work. And that there is, in fact, a place for everyone in the movement, that collaborative leadership really means finding your voice in this, finding a place and a space for you to make a difference. It reminds us that results are long-term and lasting, but that we have to have some immediate visible signs that there's an urgency of now, and so people can take on both roles, and that collective leadership not only involves the folks who are on the front line, but all of us. And I thought about one of the comments that was made about two things. One about stigma, and one that Lejeune made yesterday, or I guess at the beginning, about finding herself in this job. And I've been used to stigma all my life, as many of you have been, for your gender, for your color, for your position, for the stands that you take. We know how to strategize and work with that. But I am experiencing a new stigma, and that's of age. And I want to say and place a challenge to all of you out there that we can't divide ourselves in this room between the young who we're giving a chance to or hoping that they are already leaders. Let's not put a stigma on them because we look at them as they're young. And the mature who bring a range of experiences, let's not look at them as useless or not having the same energy. Because we're talking about a movement that's going to take all of us and that crossroad is really important, and that the energy may be different, that you need the drivers who are on the line, who are out there, as you said, in the streets with the kids every day doing the work, but you also need a rear view mirror. Someone who can bring to you that perspective that gives you lessons. Lessons that you can use, embrace or discard. It's up to you. But it's together with that collaborative thrust, belief, and action that we will be able to change the rock and the future for our children and families. Thank you. So now, we're going to continue the conversation and bring up our panel. They are esteemed because of their work, but they're more important because of their authenticity, what they've experienced and what they've learned, and they're going to share that with you as we talk a little bit about the future of leadership. You'll want to check your headsets just to make sure, because you'll have the advantage of being able to listen in your preferred language so that you don't miss anything.
Acho que estava com sua língua aqui. Mas estava com esse aqui, esse é meu. Ok. Não, ok.
I've asked each of them to begin by sharing just a quick moment of a personal reflection about some aspect, thought, question about the future of leadership that comes from their heart. And so you'll be able to read their bios and know more about them, but I want you to have a little insight into who is here as we begin this conversation together. Shanaaz, why don't we start with you?
Assalamu alaikum. I greet you with a message of universal peace. I'm at peace with you, and you are safe with me. I belong to a people of La ilaha illallah, and I'm a child of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And I come to this conversation with a deep awareness of the wisdom, of the way forward that's already present in the room. And if we had to take a moment of inviting all of the people that stand behind you and me, all the people that have shaped us, all our ancestors, all the people that have loved us, nurtured us, picked us up when we were all confused, not knowing. It's important as we enter this conversation about the future of leadership that we bring that wisdom with us so that we can own what we know already. I think if we had to ask for lessons from the future about leadership, I think we will be reminded about what we know already. And so much has already been spoken in this room. And for us to own that in new ways. And for me, leadership is a trust. My brother Paul spoke beautifully about trust. Leadership is being entrusted to you and I in the moments, in the spaces we occupy. And we need to stand up to a higher standard about what we do with that trust. I believe that communities make leaders. And if we come from that place, it's about really, am I being what my community needs from me? And how am I carrying that trust? So for me, it's coming from that deep place of humility And I pray that as we have these words and your words, that our words have weight of meaning and of humility as we try and carve our future together. So I'll pause there, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just come right on down the line.
Okay. Aloha. If you could all just close your eyes for a moment and take a journey with me. Think of a land far, far away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the most isolated, habitable place on this earth. You can't walk out of it. You can't swim out of it. A place where connection with Mother Earth, Father Sky, with a greater being, with that connection everything is dependent on that survival. Where there is no such word as dependent, where you are interdependent with the earth. With that, I just want to thank the Kellogg Foundation for allowing the voices of our people, the Kanaka Maoli, the Hawaiian people. I want to thank you for allowing us to have a voice here today. Mahalo. Thank you.
Yo voy a hablar en español, entonces les doy un tiempecito para que utilicen los micrófonos y voy a empezar diciendo que, bueno, yo soy una haitiano-mexicana, una mexicana hecha en México, y cuando estaba crecí y estudié en México, y cuando estaba a punto de terminar mi maestría, hay de esas coincidencias felices en la vida de uno que le llegan, y estaba a punto de terminar mi maestría y me llegó un formulario de un programa de liderazgo de una organización que se llamaba la organización Kellogg, que yo no conocía hasta ese momento. Lo llené, lo envié y unos meses después fui invitada a Colombia para encontrar a la gente de la fundación y empezar en esta maravillosa experiencia del Kellogg International Leadership Program, del que hago parte, y que me cambió la vida, que me dio tantas perspectivas, y justamente para mí este programa me dio herramientas para poder saber y poder cambiar de lentes en las situaciones más diversas y tener diferentes perspectivas. Y para mí el liderazgo es eso, es justamente esa visión abierta de multiplicidad y de apertura de diferentes perspectivas. Desde entonces, como tuve la oportunidad de tener esta experiencia muy joven, entonces desde el punto de vista profesional me ha moldeado desde el punto de vista profesional y personal, y actualmente en el trabajo que hago, yo trabajo en Haití con organizaciones comunitarias de mujeres, es mi eje, esta visión de apertura, de humildad, de complementariedad, que es la que hago, y es siempre un placer estar en estos espacios de aprendizaje colectivo, de reflexión y sobre todo de compartir experiencias.
Thank you, Tania. Hélio.
Good morning. Bonjour, buenos dias e bom dia. I will speak in Portuguese, please. Eu preciso agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui diante de vocês. Nós temos aqui cerca de 200 pessoas de mais de 40 países. E nós temos que nos compenetrar que nós somos aqui uma amostra importante daquilo que pode ser feito pelo mundo. Não é pouca coisa. Falou-se, talvez o que mais se falou aqui nesses dias foi em conexão, conectividade. E falou-se também em estigma. É importante converter o que a gente chama de estigma. O que é estigma? É um chip que nos unifica. É como se todos nós tivéssemos esse chip e que pudéssemos conectar com o mundo todo. Portanto, aquilo que é negativo, que é o estigma que foi construído, nos permitiu desenvolver um antídoto, uma espécie de defesa contra a opressão. Isso aconteceu em todo lugar, por exemplo, onde a escravidão se deu. Não é? Nós estamos aqui em Joanesburgo, onde o racismo, onde o apartheid foi algo legal. Algo parecido aconteceu também nos Estados Unidos. Mas em toda a América Ibérica, sem que houvesse apartheid, algo sofisticado e tão cruel aconteceu da mesma forma, e às vezes com resultados mais duradouros. Eu quero dizer que é esta conexão que eu gostaria de falar aqui depois com todos vocês. Quer dizer, como podemos formular essa conexão, como nós podemos pensar num antídoto que possa ter uma linguagem global. Em cada lugar que a opressão se deu, seja com os palestinos, com os povos originários e com os negros escravizados, nós desenvolvemos antídotos, espécie de defesa. E é exatamente esta construção que nós temos que socializar aqui. Porque, na verdade, nós já estamos conectados. A opressão nos conectou. Agora nós temos que apresentar ao mundo, um mundo que sofre uma distopia, que traz desespero, que traz privação. Nós temos que criar, além da onda verde, a onda verde, que é o momento que quer salvar a humanidade, salvar o planeta. Mas de que vale salvar o planeta se nós não salvarmos as pessoas que estão dentro dele? Então, no Brasil, eu costumo dizer que nós temos que criar uma onda preta. Essa onda preta agrega todos os povos discriminados, os povos originários, os palestinos. Esta onda preta é que vai trazer esse equilíbrio. O equilíbrio tem que ser ambiental, mas tem que ser também moral. Onde há injustiça, onde há discriminação, onde há segregação, você tem doença, né? E se de um lado o planeta Terra está doente, também o comportamento das pessoas e algumas sociedades também estão. Então eu quero dizer da minha felicidade estar aqui diante de você, liderado pela Paula. É um privilégio estar aqui diante de uma mostra importante daquilo que pode ser feito pelo mundo. E são vocês. Vocês representam essa mostra importante. Eu não lembro de ter tido a oportunidade de falar para 200 líderes ao mesmo tempo. Então, eu quero agradecer a Kellogg Foundation por essa oportunidade. Muito obrigado.
You know, Paul said to us that this was about people bringing, in this panel, their experience, their lessons, and their voices. And thinking about the beauty of being able to think globally and act locally. You've heard from each person, from their own perspective, giving you a sense of who they are, what they've done locally. But together and collectively, as we're on this stage, this is the embodiment of a global vision. And so, as you've just said, what is our new formula? What is our new vaccine? What is our new way in which we're going to tackle bridging and merging all of this harnessing of energy and expertise to make it happen? So what this panel is going to spend the next bit of time we have with you doing is kind of just exploring this question of leadership. And we're not just doing it in the context of our own home community or in the context of our own experience, but we're doing it in the context of children and families. And what does the impact, future or conditions around leadership have to do with what we see as how children are affected? So I'm going to just ask you to think about that a minute and to share some thoughts. We won't always go in order because this is a conversation. And just have these folks hear your voices as you think about some of the things that you've encountered, some of the ways in which you've been compelled to lead, and where there's a connection between children and families. And you know, the one thing I want to say to you is we are always so ready to spring to action. Sometimes thinking first keeps you from tripping. And so if you need a moment to just step back before you answer or before you think, the gift that comes forth is even more valuable. That was your time to kind of get your thought together.
Bueno, pienso que podría ser el tema de un seminario totalmente. Yo pienso en mi propio contexto, puedo agrupar como 3 grandes temas. Sería primero el tema económico. Estamos frente a un modelo económico y unas políticas sociales que han hecho más que aumentar la pobreza. En nuestros países, en Haití particularmente y también en América Latina, la situación de pobreza se ha aumentado enormemente y la brecha entre los pobres y los ricos se ha aumentado. Esta opción de modelo económico trae consecuencias tan graves en muchos sentidos. Por ejemplo, hay una grave crisis migratoria que nos afecta. La elección de este modelo económico trae también problemas ambientales, la sobreexplotación, la manera en cómo estamos produciendo. También eso es una cuestión que hay que considerar. Está también el hecho de que nuestras sociedades caribeñas y latinoamericanas son unas sociedades esencialmente patriarcales, en donde la violencia hacia las mujeres es un problema estructural y eso afecta evidentemente. Y en Haití particularmente, y esto es importante subrayarlo, 95% de la población es población negra. Sin embargo, hay un racismo, no puedo decir particular, pero un racismo. Se hizo un estudio hace un par de años, y se mostró que dentro de ese 95% de la población hay 70 denominaciones para nombrarnos. Y eso está en relación a la tonalidad de nuestra piel, a la textura de nuestro pelo, al grosor de nuestros labios y a la morfología de nuestra nariz. Y obviamente ese colorismo, esa pigmentocracia, establece un sistema de privilegios y de desventajas, y eso obviamente actúa a nivel de las interacciones sociales y define también las relaciones sociales. Eso también se traduce con un racismo cultural, en donde hay un binarismo. Entonces está lo científico contra lo no científico, todos nuestros valores ancestrales, toda nuestra riqueza histórica ligada a África es vista como algo que hay que menospreciar. El binarismo, o sea, hay una cultura que es buena, nuestra cultura no es buena. Entonces ese binarismo obviamente son cuestiones que nos afectan en el liderazgo local, y bueno, algunos aspectos también pienso que se podrían extrapolar a América Latina.
Yeah, Tania, that's so important, because captured in what you just said is not only what we can do as leaders and the models that we establish, but what messages we're giving in our action and our words to our young people early on. And so thank you for that. Other thoughts? Yeah, Leo.
I apologize for not answering quickly, and we don't have much time. I usually like to talk quickly, but with so many elders in the room, it's so hard to speak with so much experience and knowledge. So hopefully I don't say anything that offends any of our elders. But what our children need are not leaders to me. Our children need mentors and examples. And if that's what our leaders are examples of how we should be, they need training, and we need to reset the moral compass that has been lost. And in that, like the young woman who was talking yesterday about wanting to be an adult, and knowing that it's responsibility training is more important than leadership training, because leaders are people who have followers. So you need to learn how to be responsible, because the greater the leader you are, the more responsibility you have. And we need more examples and mentors in this world for our children, because where I come from, children don't like to listen, right? And I think that goes kind of common in most places, but they do watch what adults do, or the older children do, and they follow their lead. So with that, I ask everyone in this room in solidarity, when we make choices on teaching, or when we make issues come up in our households, from where I come from, everything is relational. And too much has the world turned into a transactional space. So every time we make a decision on what we're going to do, it's best for us to just take a moment and know if you're coming from a relational place in your heart space, or you're coming from a transactional space. Because the children will feed on that, and they'll learn to be either raised as relational beings or transactional beings.
Mahalo.
Eu penso que toda liderança para o futuro vai estar necessariamente conectada às crianças, porque as crianças é que são o futuro. Me parece importante não procurarmos reinventar a roda, focar no cotidiano, que é onde a vida flui. É no cotidiano que nós vamos pensar em saúde e bem-estar, em escola, em geração de renda. E se você estiver focado no cotidiano, você será proativo. A proatividade é o segundo aspecto, se antecipar aos problemas. E é necessário ter coragem. A coragem, um líder, a coragem não se confunde com a arrogância. Basta termos como exemplo Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Bispo Tutu, Madre Teresa de Calcutá. Então é necessário coragem. E depois ousadia. A ousadia é pensar naquilo que ainda não foi pensado. É trazer soluções que impactam a vida das pessoas. E o último item é o mais importante, que está ligado à juventude. Nós temos que garimpar o ouro. As nossas periferias do mundo são ouro. Nós não podemos nos enganar com as bijuterias. E é exatamente nesta juventude que mora a nossa tragédia, porque a proatividade desses jovens, sem encontrar uma oportunidade efetiva, faz com que muitas vezes nós percamos esses talentos, né? E no Brasil nós pagamos um custo muito alto. A minha colega do Brasil ontem falou que a cada 3 horas temos um George Floyd no Brasil. São 65 por dia, 23 mil por ano. Então esse escândalo acontece numa sociedade, né, considerada rica. Portanto, eu penso que garimpar ouro é exatamente buscar dar oportunidade à juventude. Eles têm talento. Esta proatividade deles se perde muitas vezes pela ausência de oportunidade. Portanto, para reduzir a violência, nós temos que reduzir as desigualdades. Ontem aqui foi feita uma pergunta sobre como é que Chicago poderia usar as experiências aqui de Joanesburgo. E aí alguém respondeu, falando das cidades da América Latina, talvez pensando em Medellín, que era a cidade mais violenta do mundo. Mas não se reduz violência com leis, com encarceramento. Só se reduz violência reduzindo desigualdade. As sociedades desiguais são profundamente violentas. Portanto, a juventude, nós temos que criar oportunidades para a juventude. Esse talento está à espera de uma oportunidade. Portanto, eu penso que nós, líderes, temos que pensar no cotidiano, temos que ter coragem, ousadia e temos também que garimpar o ouro. O ouro está precisamente onde nós imaginamos que ele não está. Ali nós temos ouro puro. É, portanto, necessário ir lá e valorizá-lo.
Pequeño, hay que pensar en las causas también, Hélio.
Sim.
Let me join. I'm so moved by what you said, Joshua. And I think fundamentally the challenge for us about the future of leadership is this notion of leadership that we've been schooled in, that we've been trained in, is a model of leadership that differentiates us, that puts distance and using a power dynamic that's not relevant for the future we want to build. So if I am to reposition myself, then I'm partnering with you. I take away the power dynamic. I'm not your leader. You know, you lead yourself, and I'm going to work with you to embed the skills and your own wisdom and insight and activate that so that you lead your life, right? So I think this very notion of leadership with putting, you know, us on a stage and a pedestal and giving ourselves names that stroke our own egos, I think that's no longer relevant for the society we must build. And, you know, we need to get out of our own way.
You know,
I would like to add one thing, and that's jargon, right? Leadership, the word itself could be a jargon word. We like to use a word called navigator. And we're all navigating through life. And those who choose to follow on your ship can do so. And those that want to follow on another ship, they can do so. And we can all sail this earth together peacefully. But navigator is a word that we like to use instead of leader. So.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Josiah. You touched my heart because that's how I'm describing the work I do now. It's not being out front. That's why I don't want to be at a podium. But it is being among, and it's giving vision and life to things. One of the questions that was given to us to kind of ponder and discuss had to do with something that was mentioned as Paul gave the introduction to this day of collaborative leadership, speaking exactly to what you're talking about, Shanaaz. The idea of getting rid of the individual leader who gets followed, or what you've said, Josiah, about it's about responsibility maybe more than leadership. And Tania, it's about the subtleties of where we sit things, and it's about the challenge of audacity and humility and how they fit together. So if we think about these crossroads, the place that people are at individually, the crossroads that children have, I mean, what is a crossroad but two paths, or a chance to stop and ponder, or to deal with that kind of uncomfortable place where there's every possibility and every risk, you know. So if we think about that whole idea of crossroads, which we're going to ask people to think about too, where are we in terms of some of the crossroads in leadership? And what might we be careful of, and what might we look to embrace? What do you think?
Let me take a bite. I think we're at a moment where the world's cities and the speed and the rate of urbanization is going to demand and compel of us to build a new social compact. Families, children come to cities in search of hope, in search of new opportunity. They often get very disappointed because cities are not welcoming spaces. Certainly not the city that I work in and live in at this time. And part of our work at this crossroads is to reimagine how we refocus state institutions. How do we create cities that are welcoming, that are places of hope, right? And we use state resources to respond to the demographic dividend that we have. Our biggest asset on the continent is our youth. And we're going to need to have revolutionary programs at scale to respond, to make that a dividend. If we don't, it becomes our biggest nightmare. The point that Paul made about hope and despair, connected youth with hope, becomes a powerhouse of what's possible. I think the demographic dividend on the United States continent is also a strategic moment of where there's a huge shift in the power balance. And I think those are important moments of crossroads.
I think there's two roads today. The road to someday leads to the town of nowhere. And the road of today is the day to act. And whatever road we're all on together in solidarity, I don't care what town we end up in.
Hélio.
Eu penso que os povos que sofreram por séculos exploração, de uma maneira particular, os povos originários e também as populações escravizadas, é aquilo que eu disse no início. E isso sempre vai estar ligado a uma causa, sempre. E fazendo o recorte de gênero e geracional, sempre. Isso está imanente ao processo. E eu penso que esses povos, eu insisto nisso, desenvolveram vacinas, defesas. A Covid-19 foi devastadora e já temos vacina que dá conta disso. E, no entanto, ainda não conseguimos curar os preconceitos, o racismo. Eu penso que esses povos têm um acúmulo que é regionalizado. Então, quando eu penso, por exemplo, na América, né, Estados Unidos, todo o Caribe, Haiti, Cuba, Venezuela, Equador, Colômbia, Brasil, em cada um desses lugares, os colonizadores foram diferentes. Mas nós éramos um povo só e tivemos que desenvolver modelos de defesa. E eu, na falta de um outro nome, esse chip, eu chamo de antena preta mundial, World Wide Black Antenna. Essa antena que nos conecta a todos, é incrível que num mundo globalizado radicalmente como é hoje o mundo, que nós ainda não tenhamos feito essa conexão. Ontem e hoje, Paul falava isso aqui de novo. As pessoas pedem conexão. E eu penso que essa conexão, esse chip adormecido, nós precisamos de nos conectar. E penso que o fato de termos sido explorados, nós unimos aos povos originários, aos palestinos, a todos aqueles que, de uma certa forma, ainda estão vivendo sob cidadania. E eu acho que esta conexão, eu penso que estarmos aqui hoje, nós temos uma possibilidade importante de desenvolver essa conexão. Como eu disse no início da minha fala, nós temos aqui nessa sala uma amostra importante daquilo que pode ser feito pelo mundo. E, diante este chip, essa conexão ela já existe, ela precisa ser apenas startada, para que nós possamos, eu sinto aqui, todo esse esforço, toda essa vontade. Essa construção que eu proponho aqui, esse construto que vai pensar em desenvolvimento econômico, em geração de renda, o cimento que vai colar os tijolos dessa construção é a nossa cultura, eu não tenho dúvida. É a cultura que vai funcionar, que vai nos emocionar e permitir essa construção. Então eu tenho essa visão. Eu penso que o SCORE, que é o Conselho pela Equidade Racial da Kellogg Foundation, pode auxiliar, inspirar o mundo, essa conexão, que é o que eu mais notei aqui nesses dias todos, as pessoas pedindo. Nós queremos conexão. Pois bem, nós já temos esse chip. Vamos acioná-lo. Então, antena preta mundial, World Black Antenna, não é só para os negros. Ela agrega todos aqueles que historicamente sofreram opressão.
Yo pienso que en términos de un poco lo que dijo Shanaaz, que efectivamente esa falta de oportunidades, esa desesperanza que tenemos en nuestros jóvenes en Haití, en América Latina, es un punto crítico que nos puede permitir rebotar hacia adelante, justamente para poder crear condiciones mejor mejores para los niños, las familias, las comunidades, pero para mí el punto esencial es esa desesperanza que grandes sectores de nuestra juventud, si hablamos de liderazgo, tienen. Entonces, ¿cómo hacer que esa chispa otra vez salga para que esa desesperanza se vuelva esperanza?
You're raising great points, particularly about Crossroads. And before we make this shift and broaden the conversation and invite others into it, I just want to say a couple of things about your sharing. One is a thank you from sharing from your heart, but the second is what you have demonstrated in your being and in the way in which we've engaged in this conversation. You've helped us remember when we pause that gives chance for a voice that may have gone unrecognized to be heard. And so silence or slowing down is not an excuse to fill a space. So thank you. You've helped us to understand that we come at things from different ways, and that it's important to not just respect, but to try to embrace those things. You know, that unlikely ally who brings a different view. Shanaaz, you just talked beautifully about systems change and how if we don't do things with our cities and with our policies and the way in which we do this, we are at a crossroads in terms of what comes. Josiah, you reminded us that we have to take into account our culture and our way of being, not just in respecting that for someone, but from taking from that what we might learn and apply in partnership. And Tania, you talk so much about, here's where I see the connection. Here's another place where this can happen. And part of the richness of collaborative leadership is making that connection, not just a connection to another person, but the connection with an idea, the connection with a possibility. And you've done that beautifully, so thank you. And Josiah, you brought passion and a view. You made us step back and step forward. So we did a little bit of a Portuguese dance with you today. As you helped us to see it's here, and it's happening here, and it's happening here. But together, this gives us hope. You, in fact, illustrated with your stories and your passion what solidarity looks like. And for that, we thank you. And so if you'll join me in giving our panel a round of applause for all they've given. I'm going to ask them to stay seated, but we're going to do something a little different this morning. Before we get into questions and answers, we're going to make sure that we're remembering some of the voices in the room. That's part of this practice, and all day we're going to be asking that. And so we've asked some of our colleagues to be reactors, to broaden the conversation, to remember that while these are experiences, they're multiplied by the experiences in the room. And Tammy's going to help us if folks will identify themselves as part of our reactors. And we've asked them either to add a thought to the richness of this morning or to pose a question or a challenge. And so those of you who are serving as reactors, you want to raise your hands?
Can I ask you to just introduce yourself, your name and surname, and where you're from, and then pose your question or comment? Thank you.
Gary Apple from the USA, Northern Michigan. This causes me to think more about, all of you have caused me to think more about, everyone in this room thinks big and goes big, and that's why we're here. But the question, and Paul already alluded to it, that I have is, how do we think small in order to go big? How do we get concrete about those next steps, those first steps, the concrete actions that are needed in order to build going big?
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Anybody want to tackle that? This is part of a conversation. So Gary is saying, hey, have you thought about this? And we're going to see who can answer.
I think on the smallest level is thinking internally. A lot of times we feel that we need this, and this to happen to feel whole again or to feel complete. But if we just take a step back and really at the smallest level understand that from our Creator, from Mother Earth that provides everything we need, we are whole. And everything will fall into place. So it's coming from that abundance and not from scarcity, no matter how much the pain and suffering causes. You got to keep that spirit alive of hope.
That's beautiful. Sure. From abundance and that scarcity.
Chicahuatica. Esto es un saludo en mi lengua materna, que es el náhuatl, que quiere decir cómo está su fuerza interior. Y bueno, la pregunta que les vengo a hacer es primeramente pues felicitar a cada uno de los participantes que están ahí compartiendo su experiencia, sus realidades, que como podemos ver es muy diverso. Las realidades del racismo en cada una de las geografías y territorios del mundo tienen ciertas características. Y luego entonces, ahorita que desde que llegamos estamos escuchando grandes experiencias y propuestas que dan esperanza, también me pongo a pensar en cómo le vamos a hacer. Hablo en específico en México y en el estado de Veracruz desde una experiencia propia. ¿Cómo le vamos a hacer para poder realmente nombrar lo que nos pasa? Las violencias. Como sabemos, las violencias estructurales y sistemáticas siempre vulneran a las personas que quieren decirlo, que no han naturalizado la violencia. Entonces, justamente repensando un poco lo que hemos vivido aquí, en esto de accionar ahora y no estar como en el futuro, algún día vamos a hacer algo, cómo nosotros en cada una de las organizaciones en las que estamos o en cada uno de los colectivos en los que estamos, cómo nos podemos hermanar cuando alguien de nuestros hermanos está vulnerable, ¿Cómo quisiera, más bien eso, la pregunta es, ¿cómo podemos apoyarnos entre todos? Ajá. Y cómo también podemos empezar a hacer estas legislaciones para poder nombrar la violencia como es y no encubrirlo con otras palabras. Por ejemplo, en mi país, en mi estado, por lo que yo pude observar, es que cuando yo iba a decir, es que hubo racismo, me dijeron, no, aquí hay discriminación. Y allá el racismo con discriminación existe, pero no lo quieren nombrar. Entonces, ¿cómo le vamos a dar sanción a las cosas cuando no nos permiten nombrarla? Gracias. Thank you very much. Obrigada.
Is there a specific person you want? Anybody there? Okay. See, I'm starting to learn what she's saying. It's to anybody.
Yo puedo contestarte y voy a hacer un poco la articulación con el compañero, con la pregunta anterior. Efectivamente se puede actuar local, pero hay momentos, o sea, una organización, los colectivos pueden hacer mucho activismo, pueden hacer mucho activismo, hacer peticiones y todo, pero llega un punto y pienso que no hay que idealizar tampoco, en el sentido de que nosotros como líderes o los líderes del mañana, llega un punto en el que todo está muy bien, tienes organizaciones democráticas, tienes organizaciones participativas, se nombra, la gente está muy consciente, pero hay otro nivel que te depasa y es el nivel político. Y entonces, por eso pienso que ahí es importante las alianzas y es importante esa multiplicidad de combinaciones de liderazgo, porque a nivel de las organizaciones no se puede, en ese tipo de acciones del racismo no se va a exterminar por una ley, pero al menos que sea sancionada, y eso solo se puede hacer desde el punto de vista político.
Gracias.
Thank you. She says thank you. Sorry, she doesn't have a mic with her anymore. It says thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. We only have time for one more.
Bom dia. Bom dia. Vou falar em português. I will speak in Portuguese. So, if you put your headphones. So, então, eu sou a Dandara, né, do projeto SETA, do Racial Equity Challenge. E eu queria, primeiro, agradecer a fala de todos vocês. Foi muito inspirador. Me fez pensar bastante sobre muitas coisas. Eu queria retomar uma ponderação que o Hélio traz sobre como a gente já está conectado enquanto grupo, né? E como essa experiência do racismo, mas a experiência da opressão, ela conecta a gente. E aí eu acho que um caminho também para a gente se conectar aqui é apresentando as nossas referências enquanto nossa trajetória. E as minhas referências, uma das muitas minhas referências, é a Lélia Gonzalez, que é uma militante e intelectual negra brasileira, e ela traz o conceito de americanidade, que é uma conexão que mulheres e homens negros e mulheres e homens indígenas têm entre si, através dessa experiência de América, dessa experiência de... Essa experiência de América, as experiências que a gente compartilhou, mesmo não estando no mesmo território, mas a gente compartilhou, e é algo que o Hélio traz, e eu queria trazer a Lélia aqui também, para vocês conhecerem e entenderem um pouco as minhas referências. E aí, a minha pergunta é um pouco como vocês enxergam o papel da educação nesse lugar de construção de novas lideranças, né? E esse papel também da educação na mentoria, na liderança, né? Eu gostei do que o Josiah trouxe em termos de mentoria. Então, enfim, vocês falassem um pouquinho sobre isso. Obrigada.
You asking anybody on the panel or someone specific?
Anybody.
Okay.
I think we have seen the results that we cannot just trust our governments to do right by education. Our education policies and systems are not creating the new world and the new future that we all desire. And we've seen a flourishing of non-governmental organizations and a range of other interventions in partnership with, donors and so on, to really step up to both critique the education system in countries that is robbing the youth of a future and trying to design an alternative future. And I think fundamentally governments, from our experience on the African continent and my own home country, is not making the right choices by prioritizing and making the bold leadership choices about choices for the future. So I think we're going to need to really look at how we build capability in an alternative education system and not just leaving it in the hands of governments, right? I think governments needs a whole lot of help, but it's probably the biggest area of intervention for the future we want.
Julia, we'll let you have that last comment.
É muito comum, a sua observação, Dandara, é muito interessante. É muito comum dizer que há um problema. Há um problema. Na verdade, nós somos, Shanaaz, parte da solução, como você muito bem disse. Os governos não sabem o que fazer. A construção de uma educação integral, ela também passa por essa coisa que eu pedi, a conectividade. A Covid evidenciou algo que já estava em andamento. Nós tornamos o planeta uma grande sala virtual. E podemos, sim, trocar experiências. Portanto, eu creio, Dandara, que longe de ser o problema, eu já concluo, então, aqui a minha participação. Nós podemos apresentar soluções para o mundo. A educação, em todo lugar, ela não busca formar pessoas inteiras, né? A educação ela tem sido pragmática para atender, muitas vezes, interesses de grupos. E, portanto, nós temos que pensar o grupo do qual a Dandara faz parte mesmo, é um desses que está desenvolvendo um projeto da Kellogg Foundation, tentando levar exatamente uma educação diferenciada. Elas devem ter gostado muito da sua resposta. E eu penso que é isso. Nós temos que pensar em educação integral. E talvez a matriz de tudo isso seja exatamente um processo educativo. Talvez, quando eu penso nessa conectividade, é para que nós possamos trocar nossas experiências, fazendo as nossas adaptações locais. E quando há essa conectividade, nós percebemos que nós somos fortes. Nós não podemos continuar a ser esse arquipélago. Nós somos muito, mas estamos soltos. Eu penso que essa conexão, ela pode iniciar aqui hoje. E eu quero reiterar a oportunidade de ter estado aqui diante de um grupo tão importante que são vocês, que são uma amostra daquilo que o mundo pode ser. Muito obrigado.
Tammy, I think we've...
I'm edging. I've got to say this.
Correct.
Okay.
I think what COVID taught me about education, we for too long farmed out the responsibility of education to the teacher, to the system, to the government. And, as a family, I haven't taken the kind of responsibility for the education, of the children that's in my care.
Amém.
Wow.
Amém.
Isso. Exatamente.
It's been an incredibly stimulating, panel for me. I don't know how you feel about it. How do you all feel about that?